our podcast this morning. I am joined with a good friend of mine, Trina Glines. Trina, aside from being a good friend of mine, also does a lot of really good stuff. She's got an online course where she designed specifically to help women strengthen their marriages. And you can find that at trinaglines.com. And she's done some really great work and helped a lot of people. And I thought she'd be a fun one to join us today as we talk about continue. This is our last podcast on resource management, and in particular, we're going to be talking about the importance of having balance in the various areas of our lives, domains of our lives, and I think Trina is really mindful of those things and tries hard to kind of juggle the various responsibilities that she has and to make sure that her life is well balanced as we can be. And so anyway, I'm glad to have Trina with us. Trina, you want to say anything to?
Thank you. Oh, finding that balance is always a work in progress.
Yes, it is. And what have you found? And you said you'd kind of been having some thoughts recently about this topic. Tell me what you've been thinking about.
I just wish so bad I could have known what I know now back when I was raising all of my kids. That's why I love what you're doing so much, because we need to get this out. Like, people need to just understand that we don't know everything. We don't work automatically the right way that's going to best serve ourselves. And when we can learn from others that are sharing this information, how so much better our lives would be. I think my life would be in a totally different place today had I been able to understand that balance when I was, raising my 5 kids.
That's a really good point. And we enter adulthood basically just following the script that was given us, mm-hmm. and doing our best. And a lot of people, we think that we have these expectations that we're just supposed to know how to run our lives well. And so a lot of times we have a lot of shame around the fact that we stumble or that we don't know how to run our lives well. And the fact is that it's no different than, learning how to drive a car or learning how to do surgery or work on a car or anything else. There are specific skills and information and knowledge that help us to be able to do our lives and our relationships well. And if we don't learn those things, then we don't know how to do them.
Exactly. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think balance is so important in our lives, but it's not something we're very good at. And it's not something that the world is going to help us do. Life is not going to help you be balanced.
No, nor is anybody going to help you be balanced. No.
You have to do it yourself. Like, you have to figure out how to do it yourself, which causes, you have to be, self-motivated in that way, because the natural man or woman in all of us is not balanced.
No. And other people typically are so busy trying to run their own lives that they're more than happy to get whatever they can from us. But not very many people are looking out to make sure that they're not taking too much, or that your life is working well for you.
Yeah.
So you really have to be able to have boundaries around those things and protect yourself. I'm not sure the best way to do this. There's one of the tools that I use is this life balance wheel, and since this is audio, I do have I'm going to see any of you that might be watching this on a video. You can look at this. So this is the life balance wheel, and the different areas on here are the areas that I feel over my almost 24 years of working with people. These are the areas that I think are most salient or most important to kind of keep in mind when we're trying to balance our lives. And I'll just kind of go around them all and then maybe come back and touch on specific ones. But the first one is love and sexuality, emotional and psychological well-being, spiritual, exercise, intellectual and professional domain of our life, social connections, family relationships, conflict management, sleep, financial, stress management, and nutrition. And we hit on all of these areas in the Healthy and Happy Relationship Enrichment class series, and kind of do a deeper dive into how to be healthy in each of these areas. But those are kind of the areas, and this life balance wheel just gives you you can fill it out from 0 to 10, and with 0 or 1 being, very much lacking in my life right now, to 10 being very abundant and very much present, working well. And what I love about it is it's a really cool graphic representation of how balanced our lives are at a glance. And it's a really powerful tool for you to fill one out, and then to have your spouse or your partner to fill one out and to compare those. And you can very quickly get a visual representation of how much both of you are, how accurately or how on the same page you both are in terms of how you feel your lives are balanced. So
I have a question for you on this.
Yeah.
So, Jeff and I took your class, and I obviously are, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, like your core, your CORE.
Yeah.
Classify that personality? No. Is that our personality?
Yeah. Personality,
okay.
Temperament, and personality.
Yeah, your temperament. Okay, so when we took your class, right? You know what I am. I'm an R. I am an R, and my husband is an O. And when he filled it out, everything's happy, great, right? And then I fill mine out, and I'm always like, I can always improve.
Right.
There's always, I only see in the future, yes, I need to do this. So we switched, and he's like,
oh, we're falling apart.
And I look at him going, are you kidding me? You don't think you can improve?
I think everything's rosy, yeah. Well,
so temperament obviously will play somewhat of a part in it, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes, it plays a huge role in it, and understanding that you're in Jeff's ability to understand that and kind of filter it through that is a really powerful tool there. Because a 10 for an O might be very different than what a 10 would be for like an E.
Yeah.
An E who sees constant improvement and always sees how things could be improved. And we'll talk a lot about core as we continue in this podcast series. But just for those of you that may be listening that don't know, is I have developed a personality or temperament profiling system model that's called core that assesses and gets at the primary reasons why we do the things that we do. And each letter, it's an acronym, and each letter stands for one of the primary temperament types. And Trina is an RE.
I guess it's my E that was coming out more, probably.
Probably more your E than your R. But your R also wants to do, right? And is thinking about the future. And so R stands for resolution, and E stands for exactness. And so Trina very much lives in the future and is always wanting things to be better and improve things. And her husband Jeff is an O, which stands for optimism. And O's are kind of rosy by nature and tend to see things through very rose-colored glasses. And so, his 8 is probably Trina's 3 or 4. That's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought that was just funny. We laughed about it.
Yeah. So how did that conversation between the two of you go?
It was good. I think at first it shocked Jeff because, he wants everything happy. He really does. Like, that is his true being, that optimism in him. It's so fun now that I understand it. because now when we have those
That'd be crazy.
conversations and wherever the conversation goes and he's kind of doing this to himself,
Right.
I get it. So I love that part, but it was good because he now understands me too. He understands where I'm coming from better. And if he doesn't, then I gently remind him, remember, I'm different
Yeah.
than you.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on these different areas of life and the importance of having them balanced?
You know, every one of them is very important. I loved how you mentioned a little bit ago when we were kind of introducing this, the importance of boundaries, because I think boundaries even plays a part in this, because you have like family and friendships. Those could get very out of balance, right? If you don't have boundaries in those areas. Obviously, any of these, I just pointed that one out. But the one thing that I have found, obviously now I'm an empty nester. I don't have any kids at home. So I have way more space to make sure I'm doing these things.
Much more control.
Way more control over it. Whereas when, I look at these young moms with these young kids, my daughter that has 2, one on the way. I mean, for her to have all these in a nice circle, how do you do it? Like, how do you do that when you have such a young family? What do you?
Well, and a huge part of that comes back to what we talked about in the last 2 episodes, which is the reservoir management, and really paying attention to where that balance between stressors and resources lies, and making sure that you're doing enough. And one of the things you have to be careful about, you don't want to look at something like this and feel overwhelmed and kind of beat yourself up and think, oh man, I'm failing in all of these different areas. The real power, this is intended to be helpful, and the real power is to say, okay, so I'm sitting at I give myself a 4 in spirituality. Well, the power of this is to say, okay, well, what's one thing within the confines of my life that I could do to bump that up a little bit? And that might be putting in 10 minutes of meditation, or it might be having more meaningful prayers, or it might be something simple like listening to uplifting music or talks. And so you can a lot of times when we're not making what's going on internally or kind of under the surface covertly, if we don't make those things overt, then our brains are trying to do the coping on their own, because our brains feel this. If our sex life isn't going well, our brains feel that. If we're feeling disconnected from relationships in our lives, whether we're making that clear and explicit or not, our brains are still tasked with trying to manage that. And so by bringing it to the forefront, you can say, okay, yeah, I only have 10 minutes a day to work on this. What can I do in 10 minutes? And then instead of your brain trying to do the coping on its own, you can direct that so that it's more productive.
And I love that. I love that we can allow ourselves, depending on the phase of life that we're in, a little bit of time, instead of, like you said, feeling guilty, feeling shame that we're not, like my learning and growing, I haven't had time to work on that. But yet if I put in a TED talk or that's enough
for where you are,
for where I'm at. And I think that's so important, that I think, like you said, this isn't meant to be overwhelming. It's kind of meant to be just a guide. But if we don't see it as, if we don't even have access to this guide, then there's no way to know where we might even be out of balance. So it's such a useful tool.
Yeah, and a really good point. And the other really good point there is that there really is a time and season for everything. The intellectual and professional area of our life, it may and typically does kind of go in spurts. When you're going to school or acquiring your training or your trade, there's a pretty intense focus on that. And then for most of us, for many years, a lot of that can get put on the back burner, especially for women. A lot of the time, that gets put on the back burner as they become consumed with with family and relationships. And there's an interesting dynamic that plays out differently, and a traditional dynamic that plays out for men and women here. Men through their 20s and 30s tend to be really focused on career development, professional development, kind of moving up in the work ladder. And research shows that they tend to neglect relationships during that period of time. And then long about, their 40s, they typically kind of know where they're going to be in their careers. At least they have a general idea, and they realize that they're kind of disconnected. Their kids are growing. They're wondering who their wives are, and they feel kind of disconnected. And so men then are at that point interested in reconnecting, and relationships tend to take a more important value at that stage of life. Unfortunately, women have been on a very different trajectory, almost the exact opposite trajectory. Many times during the 20s and 30s, women have been very consumed with relationships and parenting and having babies and focusing on those kinds of things, and have neglected personal development. A lot of times, didn't finish their education or their training that they wanted to. And so then now their kids are kind of more independent about the same time, early 40s, mid 40s. And so they're like, well, what about me? I've always wanted to finish my degree, or I've always wanted to start that business, or I've always wanted to train for a marathon, or whatever the case might be. And so a lot of times women then kind of move to a focus on that area of development right at the same time that their husbands are wanting to focus on their relationship, and they kind of miss each other there.
Yeah, I could totally see that happening. I think we felt that.
What?
I think I felt a little bit of that even.
Yeah, most of us have, and so it really comes back to communicating well, and making sure that you're, again, considering all the areas of life. And really where you get in trouble is if there's a chronic deficit for a long period of time. If you're really neglecting your nutrition for years and years and years and years, and that area is out of balance, it's going to come home and cause you problems, because your brain's not going to get the fuel that it needs to be able to produce the neurotransmitters and to be healthy. And so it really doesn't work well when our lives are out of balance, when we're kind of, I don't know how to say that, but kind of not smoothly rolling along or whatever.
Yeah.
Rolling on a misshapen tire or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I know two things on here that I've been very conscientious of, and even, learning a lot more about. Number one is stress management, and number two is the emotional, like our mental health. And I think people are getting better at realizing this is a vital part of life. Where I think for a long time, Denim, correct me if I'm wrong, like it was not talked about. Not
prioritized, not valued.
Do you feel like that's changing? Do you feel like people are recognizing it more so?
I think so. I do. Although, I look at how from a policy perspective we've handled the coronavirus and COVID, and we're several months into this now, and I think actually in a lot of ways the way that this has been handled is pretty similar to that, where I think a lot of people and a lot of policymakers have neglected or undermined the long-term effects on our emotional development and our stress management that a lot of this is having. And some of that is, you're dealing with a crisis and you don't know what you're dealing with at first, and you got to kind of react. But I think that what did we prioritize? We prioritized physical over emotional. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that it's better than it was, 10 years ago. and I still don't think that those areas maybe get as much due as they probably ought to get.
Yeah. Yeah. I've just noticed more people, I'm seeing more things spoken about mental health and that kind of thing. I'm super grateful for. I'm grateful for, just people acknowledging it as, I mean, for heaven's sakes, our brain is our most important organ in our body, right? And so
Yeah, one we ought to be taking good care of,
we
right?
ought to be taking good care of. And so, and not that, I mean, I don't know, for me with COVID, the one good thing that I've noticed with COVID for me is the ability to get rid of things that aren't necessary. Like, I feel like some, for some, this is just my experience. Like, obviously there's been, in my religion, things have slowed down as far as like meetings, stuff I have to go to,
Yeah.
all of these things that I've realized, okay, maybe that was out of balance. Maybe we need to look and find a new balance. And so it's had me help me reset. Like, we can be better with less sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges of living in our day, living when we live. They're choosing among all of the many great opportunities that we have, and the great options that we have is pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
And 100 years ago, before the urbanization of America, when in an agrarian society, it's all necessity, right? And everybody, it takes all hands on deck to just to grow the food and produce the food and take care of things. And in our society now, we've got lots of freedom in terms of what we focus on and what we do, and we end up running really fast sometimes.
I think we expect way too much of ourselves. Way too much. That's why, like, you have in here play and fun, right? And
Yep.
finding, you have a life purpose. Like, are we really adding in things that are going to bring us the joy, the happiness, instead of just the, we got to get this all,
Right.
Yeah.
So what have you noticed? I know you've had some personal experience with this. What have you noticed? These are not discrete categories in our lives that don't affect one another. I mean, you kind of hit on that a little bit, but what have you noticed in terms of like stress management and emotional and psychological well-being, and how that affects some of these other areas of our lives?
It affects everything. So I've started, doing yoga on a daily basis.
Good.
And breathing. And it's crazy because I noticed during this process of getting to know myself better, right? Like, really, I was not breathing properly. Everything in my body was tense. I was holding everything just so tense all the time. And it took, hello, I'm almost 50 years old. I'm just barely figuring this out.
Right.
I'm like, everything is like, I'll be driving down the street in my car and I'll notice how I'm holding my jaw. And I'm like, what? Trina, just let it be, right? Yeah. And so I'm getting very much more aware of my surroundings, of my body, which then affects how I feel, which then affects, all my other areas in my life. Am I happy? Am I, able to have a good relationship with my husband because I'm feeling better and I've taken some time for myself this morning, those type of things. But I think often, I know during those years raising my kids, I never even paid attention how I was feeling.
Right. You don't even know that's that interoception or monitoring what's going on internally is one, is not a very big strength for ours, and two, is not something, so for 40 plus years of your life, your body was probably way over tense.
Yeah.
And then the effects on that across time really have a powerful influence.
It does. And I know for me, and I don't know if this is personality wise, when I'm doing something for myself with stress management or emotional, I like have to consciously, like say I'm doing yoga, I know I've got these other things I need to be doing. I have to bring myself back to that moment
Over and over and over
over and over
again.
and over and over. Like, this is okay. This is for me right now. And even on the days that I only like, I'm like, crap, I really don't have time today, but I'm gonna do 15 minutes. And I have my little app that sets it for 15 minutes. But I literally have to bring myself there. I'm getting better at it now,
That's
where
good.
it's more natural. But and I think people need to recognize, because I have friends who say, oh, I can never do yoga. I could never, which is okay. They don't have to. I'm using yoga as an example.
Right.
My brain would never close off. I could never do yoga. And I'm like, but have we allowed ourselves time to learn how to balance that part of our life, that we don't have to keep doing running and just fast pace all the time?
Right.
We've got to slow down.
Well, and if the other thing too is that if we don't do this proactively, our bodies will do it for us at some point. Um,
Which
because
I
you
have
can't.
learned all too well, because
Right.
I deal with a lot of health issues, and I've learned it all too well.
Right. You can't abuse this for too long without it breaking down.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't connect the dots with, okay, so how does what's going on financially affect me, my social connections, or how does my stress management affect my sex life, or how does nutrition affect my desire to have sex with my husband or wife, but these things are all interconnected. And when there's dysfunction, one of the things about systems is that typically what's going on in one area will be reflected in some way in the other areas. And so if we're not paying attention to the overall system, then it's going to be those problems are going to be present and to show up in other domains of our lives.
I was just going to say, like, when I'm working on one of these, it positively changes some of the others. Like, oh, I'm feeling like my self-esteem is really good right now.
Good.
Why did I mark a 5 before? I might get a 9 now, or what? Like, it really does. Like, you can be working more on one that you felt was more prominent, and it will positively affect the others.
Absolutely. That's one of the coolest things. In fact, when I first started my education 100 years ago, my entire education and framework in human development and family science is built on family systems theory. And one of the things that was most appealing to me right from the get-go was that very fact that you can make it, just like any system, you can make a change way over here in one area and have it affect another variable way over here, because it makes the whole system a little bit more healthy. Mm-hmm. And so by being proactive in identifying areas to improve on, you can see improvement across the board. And sometimes there is a particular stuckness. So there might be some real particular dysfunction around finances, or you might you might have you might have some trauma sexually that produces some unique stuckness in the sexual intimacy in your marriage. And so if there's a particular stuckness, then that stuckness, I don't think that's a word, but needs to be addressed. And until it's addressed, it will continue to inhibit your progress and your overall development. And so having the courage, and I do think, back to your comment a few minutes ago, I do think that over the past several years, there's been so much less shame and so much less embarrassment around acknowledging our humanness. Probably another not word, but our realness, and the fact that we struggles, and it's okay to educate ourselves, and we have tons of science on what it takes to be healthy and happy. And if we'll learn those things, then we can we absolutely don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to. You don't have to have every time there's a fight, have it turn into World War III, or every time your husband puts the moves on and wants to have sex, that you get a big pit in your stomach and the last thing you want to do is to have him touch you. Or if your friends invite you over, or your family's having a get together on Sunday, and it creates a trauma response in your chest. You don't have to live with those things day after day and month after month and year after year. You can absolutely do things to heal and to change things for the better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So that's probably, I don't know how long people are going to want to listen to this, but that's probably about long enough. I really appreciate your time, Trina. It's always fun to be able to visit with you, and I appreciate you joining me today. Any closing kind of thoughts or ideas on the importance of life balance?
I think it's vital to our well-being. I really do. And it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. I think that's something we have to be very cautious of, because like, especially my personality, like I want the perfect circle. But like you mentioned before, like there's a time and season for all things, and I think it's okay to embrace that. But this is such a good tool to give us a reference of where we're at, and then pick the one or two that you want to work on and consciously work on them, and just, be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Whatever, it doesn't matter where you are, just start from wherever you are and move forward. And if you want a copy of this life balance will, shoot me a message or whatever, DM me or whatever you call it, and I'll get you a copy. But it is so important that we be balanced in our resources, and that we're paying attention to the various areas of our lives. Some people tend to just want to focus on what's going well and ignore things that are not going well. Other people just want to focus on all the problems and take for granted the things that are going well. And the real power is recognizing the wholeness of us and the importance to have balance in the various domains of our lives. And like Trina said, just take a small step. It might just be opening up a conversation. It might be writing in your journal and just exploring what you're feeling. But one of the things that I've got on the bottom of this is to pick 3 areas to improve, and then to identify just one step in each of those areas, how I will improve that area. So I'd invite you to do that, and I appreciate you joining us today, and we'll see you next week.